Okay, and continuing on with our discussion about Adam and Eve, I want to read something to you from the Bible so that you can see that historical, traditional theologies can't answer this question. And it's really important to answer it if we're going to press on and become supernatural believers, not just natural believers. And the Bible makes a distinction between spiritually minded people and carnally minded people, or naturally minded people. And sometimes, it's really hard to make a distinction between the two as human beings. So I want to share this one scripture with you. And here's what it says. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam. Am I talking about this? That even though we were in the seed or the loins of Adam, we did not commit the sin of Adam, and yet death reigned over us. And you go like, well, how is that fair? And why did it work that way? And there is no theologies historically or traditionally that can answer that question. And so I want to ask you this question. Jesus said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part with me. And many departed from him because they said, who can hear this? This is too hard. So I ask you, when do you refuse to get out of the boat and say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to walk on that water because it's too dangerous for me, and I don't want to risk my salvation. I just don't want to entertain this. I don't want to look at it. I'm already set. When do you turn back and say, this is too hard for me? Because there are things that God's going to put before us that are going to require us to either continue on with him in terms of how he wants to reveal himself to us from the scriptures, or whether we're going to hold fast and stay in the boat of tradition, conservatism as it pertains to churchianity, and we won't grow if you do that. So my question is, when do you turn back, or will you turn back? So it's all about getting out of the boat. And so I want to press on and talk to you a little bit more about this whole issue between the natural man and the spiritual man, because we should all endeavor and desire, whatever the cost, to be spiritual. And that's going to be dangerous for a lot of people. It's going to be real risky, and it's going to require a lot of courage to trust in God to not lead us into a pit. And that's the fear that all of us share. But if we really secure in Jesus, we don't need to fear, because he won't give us a snake if we ask him for a fish. That's not who he is. He won't lead us into temptation. He'll never do that. He'll only guide us into the truth and the revelation of who he is if we're trusting in him. If you're trusting in the church or some pastor that's you may be famous, or you can hang your hat on this guy, then you're not going to grow in faith. You're going to just be somebody that is breastfed, and you're just going to eat foods filtered through somebody else's opinion. Even when it comes to what I'm sharing with you, you have to study the scriptures yourself. So what is it I want to talk about today? It says that, behold, the man looks in the mirror, and like looking in the scriptures or being before God in prayer, and then he turns away and goes away, and he forgets who he is. There's something about a natural man who looks in a mirror and then turns away and forgets who he is. You ever notice how many times in a day a woman looks in a mirror? It's amazing. They don't want to forget what they look like. They may need to make sure they're looking good. They want to put out a good appearance. And I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying maybe that's a great metaphor on how much and how often we look in the scriptures to make sure we know who we are. And I laugh sometimes at how often people go to church, and when they get out to the car, a fight breaks out. It's how quickly we forget who we are. I've read the Bible, I don't know how many times, and yet I go through some areas of Scripture and going, I feel like I've never read this before. How have I forgotten? How does it happen that way? And I used to think about that scripture and go, well, certainly I'm not a natural man because I read the Bible all the time and I worship the Lord, and I'm not a natural man, I'm a spiritual man. And then I realized one day that, you know what? I'm that kind of guy that looks in the mirror and goes away and forgets who he is. And then I realized so is everybody. So is everybody dealing with this problem of forgetfulness. When the Jews were carried off to Babylon, the land of Babylon was called the land of forgetfulness. They forgot about their temple. They forgot about being in the promised land. They quickly forgot it. And it's an amazing problem that we have as human beings, how quickly we forget, especially when it comes to the scriptures, spiritual matters, and how quickly we can be removed by our own focus away from the Lord. You look at history, the 7 churches of Revelation, all of their lights went out. You look at the Reformation, where there was this reaction to the abuses of the Catholic Church and the Pope, and how quickly the light went out in Germany. And 300 years later, all of a sudden comes Hitler. And look at how many churches today have started out in the Spirit, and now their lights are going out. A church I used to attend is totally changed. It's like the lights have gone, the tide's gone out. Something happened. Somebody shut the light switch off, and it's not the same. How quickly we forget. And what I want to point out is not to make anybody feel guilty. It's not my motive here is to make people, oh yeah, I'm just a carnal man. No, that's not the point. The point is I'm trying to point out how quickly we forget, the problem we have as human beings in forgetting what spirituality is, and how quickly we fall from that, how quickly we have a reversion to amnesia. And that is the condition of our situation as people of God in this world. We have a kind of a propensity to gravitate towards amnesia, forgetfulness, the land of forgetfulness. And we need to deal with that. We need to understand it because it's something that we have to deal with not just once a week when people go to church, but every day. Every day we have to remember who we are. We have to remember who we are. We have to not fall asleep. But when you think about this whole issue of amnesia on a greater scale, it has something to do with this whole issue of Adam and Eve and what this story means in terms of discovering how we can stay focused and understand our predicament better so that we can walk uprightly and we can not forget who we are as easily. It's still going to be a problem, but not as easily as we normally do, because we'll have a higher objective understanding of existence and who we are. And so the story begins with really understanding that the Adam and Eve story is fundamental to overcoming this problem of amnesia, because we have amnesia. We cannot remember. We just simply cannot remember many things in the spiritual dimension. And I wanted to use this scripture to point out the peculiar predicament that we face every day in falling back to sleep, in reverting to amnesia, forgetting who we are, forgetting where we came from, forgetting the things that lead us to higher ground, higher understanding, and more revelation of Jesus. We suffer from amnesia. And I want to take that another step further in the next message.